Today I signed an executive order to launch the first ever self-deportation program for illegal aliens.
At 4:30 a.m. on a quiet street in Brooklyn, the flashing lights of the convoy pierced the darkness as agents from the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement sealed off the entrance to a nondescript office building. Inside, piled high on a set of shelves, lay hundreds of file folders, each one listing a Chinese language name, each one showing a commercial trucking license issued by multiple states. What stunned the team was that most of the individuals couldn't speak English, had no legal residency or citizenship, yet they were legally operating commercial 18-wheelers across highways in America. They weren't merely driving trucks, they were moving shadows through a crack in America's own license and security system. The incident did not begin here, though. It was set off by a deadly crash in Florida. That fatal collision acted as the first domino, but when investigators began stitching together driver logs, state license data, and immigration records, they uncovered something far larger than a case of undocumented labor. They found the faint, yet unmistakable trace of a foreign-linked network infiltrating America's supply chain and testing its borders from the inside. So if you're ready to follow the trail, from the road surface of Florida to the hidden rooms where America's logistics are being rewritten, hit subscribe to Military Power now. Because what you're about to uncover isn't routine crime. It's a strategic breach, unfolding in real time. In August 2025, what first appeared to be a routine traffic accident on the Florida Turnpike evolved into one of the most significant federal investigations of the year. Around 3 in the afternoon, a tractor-trailer attempted an illegal U-turn, blocking multiple lanes before a minivan collided with its trailer at full speed. 3 people were killed instantly, and the chaos on the highway left investigators searching for answers that would soon lead far beyond a single reckless driver. When state police began reviewing the driver's records, they found glaring irregularities. The man had failed his commercial driver's license knowledge test 10 separate times in Washington state in 2023. Yet somehow, months later, he held not 1 but 2 valid CDLs, one issued in California. His English language exam appeared to have been waived, and his residency documents were incomplete. What initially looked like an administrative error began to resemble something far more deliberate. The case quickly drew the attention of the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. As agents dug deeper, the trail of documents led them to a small nonprofit headquartered in New York City, known as the Chinese American Trucker Organization, USA Incorporated, or Katau. Publicly, Katau described itself as a community organization offering job placement and training opportunities for Chinese immigrants in the American transportation industry. But when agents examined its recruitment and training records, a different picture emerged. Evidence suggested that Katau was quietly channeling thousands of Chinese nationals, many of them undocumented, into the U.S. trucking sector through programs conducted entirely in Mandarin. These courses promised fast-track commercial licenses and guaranteed employment upon completion. Photos and videos obtained during the inquiry showed classrooms filled with students studying American traffic signs translated into Chinese, while instructors coached them through simulated exams. Even more troubling were the financial trails uncovered by Treasury Department analysts. Bank records and tax filings revealed a steady stream of small but consistent wire transfers from accounts linked to companies in mainland China to U.S. training firms and placement agencies affiliated with CATOU. The funding often arrived through intermediaries posing as scholarship or community development programs. By the time investigators assembled the evidence, the scope of the case had expanded far beyond Florida. It wasn't just about one unqualified truck driver or a few corrupt examiners. The question that now dominated every briefing was far more alarming. Who was coordinating this network? And why had America's own highways become the final destination for what looked increasingly like a foreign-designed infiltration? In the quiet hours before dawn, a coordinated strike unfolded inside a Brooklyn warehouse. Teams from U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement The Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Department of Homeland Security moved with precision, surrounding the building that had served for years as the headquarters of a seemingly ordinary community business. By sunrise, it was clear this was no routine inspection. What federal agents had uncovered would peel back the curtain on one of the most complex infiltration schemes ever tied to America's transportation network. At the center of the operation was a man named Geng Hang, also known as Gang Hang, a well-connected entrepreneur, respected within Chinese-American business circles, and founder of two entities, the Chinese-American Trucker Organization USA Incorporated and the Red Apple Employment Agency. Both presented themselves as legitimate community ventures. Katau claimed to train and assist Chinese immigrants seeking work in the U.S. trucking industry, while Red Apple positioned itself as a placement firm linking qualified drivers to logistics companies. Yet beneath this carefully constructed facade lay a system designed not to help newcomers integrate, but to manipulate the licensing process from within. Investigators soon discovered that Hang's network had been running a multi-state training and certification pipeline that bypassed basic security requirements. According to documents later obtained by law enforcement and reviewed by multiple news outlets, KTU organized commercial driver training courses, marketed exclusively in Mandarin, and broadcast across Chinese social media platforms. The ads promised fast-track U.S. commercial licenses and guaranteed employment, all without mentioning English proficiency or immigration status. At training centers in California, New York, and Illinois, recruits were taught every part of the CDL exam entirely in Mandarin. Classroom sessions covered traffic laws, mechanical operation, and safety codes, but all through translated materials. Many of the trainees, investigators found, were undocumented migrants who had entered the United States using temporary visas or loopholes in student and cultural exchange programs. Once the training concluded, they were sent to specific DMV offices that had reputations for lenient oversight. There, through intermediaries or corrupt employees, many obtained genuine commercial driver's licenses, legal credentials granting access to operate heavy vehicles across interstate highways. This revelation stunned officials. A commercial driver's license isn't just a work permit, it's a pass into the backbone of America's national infrastructure, a system that moves fuel, raw materials, military supplies, and food across thousands of miles. If that certification process can be corrupted, the entire network becomes vulnerable. Unvetted drivers, operating massive trucks capable of hauling thousands of pounds of cargo, could travel across state lines unrestricted, access secure freight hubs, and transport materials vital to national operations. The problem was no longer about immigration or fraud. It was about the integrity of the nation's logistics grid. As ICE and DHS analysts examined deeper layers of evidence, wire transfers, DMV records, immigration logs, they discovered that Hang's enterprise wasn't acting in isolation. Katau appeared to function as one link in a much larger network, blending labor recruitment, transnational finance, and influence operations tied to entities based in Beijing and Shanghai. Money was moving through nonprofit foundations and community exchange programs, disguising its origin behind cultural grants and educational partnerships. The more investigators dug, the clearer it became that this was not an employment racket, but an organized system built to infiltrate from within. By the time the federal task force connected the dots, the implications were staggering. America's highways, long considered a symbol of open commerce and internal security, had been quietly compromised. Not through violence, not through hacking, but through paperwork, training programs, and state licenses. The vulnerability was administrative, embedded deep inside the country's own bureaucratic machinery. The question confronting national security officials was no longer simply who was driving the trucks. It had evolved into something far more critical. Who were they driving for? And under whose direction? If thousands of individuals could be inserted into key sectors of U.S. logistics through foreign engineered pathways, what else might already be in motion, hidden just beyond the next bend in the road. The team from the Chinese-American trucker organization, USA Incorporated, did not operate alone. As investigators from U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Federal Bureau of Investigation dug deeper, they uncovered a web of support running through seemingly innocuous community nonprofit groups. Key among them was the Chinese American Planning Council, a long-standing organization based in New York that claims to provide immigration and social services. Investigators found that CPC had received donations from entities with ties to the government of the People's Republic of China. For example, records show contributions from the state-owned Industrial and Commercial Bank of China and the Bank of China, totaling up to $445,969 since 2018. On paper, CPC's mission is straightforward: help immigrants settle, find jobs, access education and social services. Yet under the radar, ICE's inquiry revealed that some of its sub-programs and affiliated centers, located in hubs like Manhattan, Queens, and Brooklyn, may have served as hubs for more than after-school tutoring and job fairs. Surveillance and financial tracing indicated that funding, recruitment channels, and even training events tied into the Katau framework were routed through community centers that would not raise alarms at first glance. Imagine a storefront community center in Queens or Sunset Park. Families come in for childcare services, seniors attend wellness classes, while upstairs, behind closed doors, sessions in Mandarin gear up immigrants for commercial truck driving licenses. The adverts promise fast-track CDL training. And indeed, ICE found mirrored advertising in Chinese live streams offering exactly that. From those centers, applicants were pushed into DMV-certified tests in states known for looser oversight. When multiple such centers are combined with transnational money flows, patterns emerge. The CPC's grants and donations paper trail shows direct links to mainland Chinese financial institutions, and the fact that more than half of CPC's revenue comes from federal and state grants adds to the complexity. The result is a network that appears simultaneously as grassroots immigrant aid and as a conduit for influencing labor and licensing sectors in ways that go far beyond local job placement. That duality matters. On one hand, these community service centers genuinely aid immigrants. On the other, the same infrastructure can be repurposed, knowingly or not, to channel foreign-influenced pathways into critical U.S. infrastructure. At the heart of ICE's concerns lies the intersection of migration, licensure, and national security. The suspicion is no longer only about fraudulent licenses. It is about the possibility that licensed drivers, recruited via channels tied to foreign-linked nonprofits, might become vectors within supply chain and infrastructure access systems. As one federal letter puts it, the depth of these relationships demands scrutiny. An undercover video reportedly showed CPC staff advising immigrants on how to avoid interaction with ICE officials. Furthermore, the House Homeland Security Committee has begun to investigate whether NGOs like CPC are facilitating illegal immigration or foreign agent activities while receiving U.S. taxpayer funds. And so, we arrive at the punchline of this chapter. From buildings marketed as cultural community centers, a more complex scheme was operating beneath the surface. The raises the chilling question: what begins as job training might end as a pathway into the state's vital infrastructure. In other words, it's not just about who receives a license, it's about who ultimately controls the wheels. The real question is no longer who is driving, it is who are they transporting for and under whose direction. The moment the Operation Twin Shield was launched, it became clear that the scale of the infiltration went far beyond a few bad Apple drivers. It exposed a national network that spanned states, systems, and jurisdictions. Federally coordinated, this secret task force brought together U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Federal Bureau of Investigation, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services under one banner to investigate cross-state exploitation of America's commercial driver licensing system. In Minnesota alone, officials announced over 1,000 cases investigated and 275 showing signs of fraud or national security concerns. The investigation spread into more than 10 states, including California, Texas, Illinois, Pennsylvania, and New York. In each jurisdiction, patterns emerged. Suspicious foreign nationals holding commercial driver's licenses while lacking proper immigration status, oversight, or English proficiency. Authorities found that in states like Florida and California, Department of Motor Vehicle employees had allegedly sold valid CDL credentials to applicants who neither met the testing requirements nor the lawful residency criteria. One report documented over 1,000 real licenses issued to undocumented migrants in a single state with lax checks. To understand how this scheme worked, investigators mapped a detailed network. Training and recruitment agencies provided Mandarin language instruction. Community centers funneled candidates into lenient DMV locations. Licenses entered the national CDL database and were accepted at face value across jurisdictions. The national database that records every CDL issued becomes the backbone of the system. But if corrupted from within, it becomes a vulnerability. Just one DMV insider can manipulate data entries, enabling hundreds of unvetted drivers to receive legal credentials within minutes. That one breach, when multiplied by dozens of sites, translates into a highway-wide security gap. This was not simply a matter of poor paperwork, because a CDL unlocks access to interstate highways, fuel shipments, freight hubs, and critical supply chain routes. The stakes are strategic. Once a driver is certified, they can traverse state lines, carry high-value cargo, enter logistics nodes, all while their status and oversight might be compromised. Investigators warned that what appeared to be a licensing scam could also be a covert pathway into America's infrastructure. The investigation team pointed to evidence of financial transfers and shell companies linked to the training agencies and license sellers, which deepened concerns about foreign-linked influence. The operation's visuals suggested a spiderweb of unsuspecting components: a seemingly innocent job training center in Queens, a DMV office in Sacramento, a small staffing firm in Chicago, all tied through offshore banking and shared license issuance logs. On the monitors inside the Enforcement Command Center, investigators displayed a flowchart connecting each stage of the operation. Data from the Department of Motor Vehicles linked to staffing agencies, which in turn coordinated with community centers that funneled applicants into foreign language training programs conducted in Mandarin, ultimately leading to the issuance of commercial driver's licenses. And when investigators examined the money trail, they found payment flows from overseas accounts into U.S. organizations tied to the scheme, signaling that the network was both sophisticated and persistent. As the case unravels, the once straightforward question of who's getting a trucking license now transforms into who is controlling the driver, the cargo, and by extension, the infrastructure they serve. If thousands of credentials have been issued under false pretenses, the possibility remains that some of those drivers are operating under networks that have yet to be fully uncovered. The federal government now faces the challenge of not only revoking fraudulent licenses, but also tracing the broader strategic threat they may represent. A national campaign spanning states and systems exploited the very database designed to regulate safety and compliance. And the mini-hook here: when the financial investigations began, Washington summoned an emergency meeting. Suddenly, a licensing issue had morphed into a national security crisis. But as agents pored over the final batch of digital records, one question froze the entire room. If forged licenses could spread across 10 states undetected, where exactly was the money keeping this network alive? And who was sending it? When the trail of fake licenses and unvetted drivers led investigators to financial ledgers, the picture shifted from a licensing scam to something far more ominous. The U.S. Department of the Treasury and the U.S. Department of Justice began tracing dozens of seemingly small money transfers that radiated from companies in Shenzhen and Shanghai into U.S. nonprofit and training organizations connected to the trucking license scheme. These weren't large seizures that made headlines, but hundreds of thousands of dollars in micropayments that cumulatively pointed to a systematic network of funding and influence. Some of the accounts tied to these transfers belonged to training centers that advertised Mandarin language truck driver courses and job funnels into U.S. commercial driving. Others were scholarship or exchange program accounts that, at first glance, looked like legitimate immigration worker development funds. But in the context of this investigation, they raised red flags. Accounts labeled Transport Training Fund or Logistics Placement Scholarship, transferring funds to U.S. entities that then recruited Chinese nationals into CDL programs. Public reporting by investigative outlets confirms this pattern of activity. One investigation by the Daily Caller News Foundation described a Chinese government-linked organization alleged to have helped illegal migrants obtain U.S. commercial driver's licenses. What began as a labor recruitment chain now looked like a deliberate pathway for influence operations. U.S. security officials raised the alarm that the system was being leveraged to channel people, with fewer checks and less oversight, into roles that give access to national infrastructure, freight transport, interstate highways, fuel supply chains. In other words, a network of migrants could be used as legitimate drivers, but operate under circumstances that blur the line between employment and strategic access. A government report noted that foreign states now make subtle use of economic and diaspora channels to advance national influence. For the United States, this means the border isn't just a geographic line anymore. It now includes the systems of licensing, credentialing, and training. When a commercial driver's license is issued to someone who bypasses proper residency checks, language proficiency tests, or credentials, the immediate risk is safety on the roads. The deeper risk is that the person becomes part of a supply chain system that could be manipulated. A tanker crossing state lines or a freight truck delivering materials becomes not just a driver and cargo, but a node in an access network. The infusion of funds from overseas turns this from a domestic issue into a national security concern. The mixing of technology companies, educational exchange funding, manpower recruitment, and transport licenses reflects what analysts call sharp power, where influence is exercised not openly, but through channels that look innocuous. A Stanford-led report called out exactly this kind of network. Business-related United Front organizations, regional chambers, and recruitment networks that link Chinese firms, diaspora organizations, and U.S. local institutions as parts of a broader influence strategy. So far, enforcement has focused on revoking fraudulent licenses, arresting individuals involved in the licensing racket, and dismantling training firms that acted as fronts. Yet the question remains: if a network can legalize thousands of drivers via overseas funding and U.S. training infrastructure systems, what prevents it from legalizing thousands more as part of a wider strategic operation? At this juncture, the U.S. transport infrastructure, highways, border crossings, logistics hubs, sits exposed. The licensing system that was meant to regulate safety and commerce is revealed as a weak point in a chain of influence and access. If one network can legitimize thousands of drivers, what is stopping it from legitimizing a larger strategy? As the dust settled on Operation Twin Shield, federal agents from U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, Federal Bureau of Investigation, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and the U.S. Department of Justice announced that they had dismantled dozens of sham companies, arrested multiple state DMV employees, and exposed an intricate recruitment network funneling undocumented individuals into America's commercial driving system. According to official statements, over 1,000 cases of fraud or ineligibility were flagged during the initial phase of the operation. Still, the investigation remains active as authorities continue tracing financial flows, license issuance records, and the broader infrastructure of influence behind the scheme. At its core, the case shifts the battlefield of national security from the physical border to the very heart of the administrative infrastructure. No longer is the threat simply someone crossing the border illegally. It is someone being licensed, credentialed, and empowered to operate key mobility and logistics systems inside the United States. When a commercial driver's license is issued to someone who bypassed proper language testing, residency verification, or standard oversight, the implications reach far beyond one truck on one highway. They ripple into supply chains, freight corridors, and infrastructure thought to be secure. From the American perspective, the government is acting swiftly. New rules and inspections are being introduced. License testing systems are subject to tighter scrutiny, and the use of artificial intelligence-assisted checks for language proficiency and identity verification are reportedly being deployed. The aim: close the door on fraud, secure every access point, and ensure that licenses reflect not just competency, but legitimacy. Now ask yourself, if a single license can cloak an entire network, how many open highways remain for external forces to exploit? What starts as a job training program might serve as a Trojan horse into the nation's freight and transport infrastructure. The real question is no longer simply who is driving the truck, but whose agenda is sitting in the driver's seat. What do you think about Operation Twin Shield? Was it a crackdown or a warning for America? Share your thoughts below and subscribe to Military Power to uncover more untold security secrets.